Hello, everyone, and welcome to the start of the Buyer Insights and Intelligence series. My name is Andrew Gaffney. I'm Editorial Director with Demand Gen Report. Really glad you could join us for this first session. It's going to be a great kickoff to the whole series. Obviously, the theme of our series here is about using Buyer Insights and Intelligence to drive better campaign performance and more relevant experiences for buyers in the B2B space. We, for 9 years now, have done a B2B Buyer Study and used this first session to drill into some of the results there and analyze what we're seeing in terms of shifting buying patterns, particularly relevant in this time where we sit today, given the COVID-19 crisis and the impact that that's having. So the title of the session is Changing Dynamics of B2B Buying, New Data on How Decision-Making, Digital Engagement, and Demand Could Shift Due to COVID-19 Crisis. Again, I'll be sharing some data and joined by one of the top practitioners in B2B to help me look at some of the survey results and analyze some of the trends around it. All those sessions of the series, we're going to try to make it as interactive as possible, so we'd love if you'd share any of the data that you find particularly interesting, any comments around that. Our team will be monitoring social media. We'd ask if you could use the hashtag BII20. That'll help us keep tabs and respond to any relevant questions and comments and amplify those. You'll also see the handles for our speakers today if you want to include those in anything you post. Our presentation will last for about 30 or 40 minutes. We'll go through all of the data and slides. Encourage you to submit any questions. We'll save some time at the end for questions. You can type in those questions right in the Q&A tab in the On24 platform on the top right there. If we don't get to your questions, we'll follow up with you directly and share any data points that you might want to get more information on. There's also some relevant resources, including a study that we'll be referencing, available that you can download as well. And on the left side, you can monitor social media right within the platform. One of the frequently asked questions we get is the session is being recorded, so all registrants will get a chance to go back and review the content or share it with their peers. So without further ado, let me introduce my partner in crime. I've had the good fortune of working with John Daring on a lot of content and thought leadership over the past, going on close to 10 years now. John is the Senior Director of ABM Technology and Strategy at Demandbase, and again, somebody I go to frequently for perspective on what he's doing as a practitioner, but he also is very close to seeing what other B2B marketers are doing in ABM and a lot of the cutting edge areas. In John's role, he develops strategy for marketing technologies to fulfill Demandbase's vision for account-based marketing. Over the past decade, John has refined his marketing expertise while holding positions in marketing and sales leadership with companies like Salesforce, Strongview Systems, and Spoke.com, as well as a nonprofit organization such as surfforlife.com. John, thanks for joining me again.
Always a pleasure, Andrew. Yeah, 10 years. Whew, time flies.
We've been going at it for a while, so again, I always really enjoy your perspective, so looking forward to today. So let me get started looking at some of the data. So talked about this year and this time, this period in history is obviously hugely disruptive on a personal and professional level for folks. So this study just did wrap up a couple weeks ago, and we were able to ask these questions post the COVID crisis. So we asked how the crisis has impacted the way they are researching potential purchases and engaging with potential solution providers. And again, just to clarify for any folks that haven't seen the survey we've done, we start out by asking everyone that participates in the survey if they've been involved in a B2B purchase over the past 12 months, and then delve into what their role in it was. We get some information about their industry, what this purchase was. But for the purposes of today, when we wanted to look at how the crisis has impacted, not a huge surprise that 47% said they've had to delay potential purchases. We've seen a lot of business kind of get put on hold. There's a lot of uncertainty. I think there's some economic uncertainty. But I think the bigger surprise to me, John, and something I want to get your perspective on, we did see 30% that said they've actually gone in the other direction. They've had to escalate purchases, due to changing business needs. So I think it's a good reminder to me and other folks that I've spoken to not to just assume that all business is on hold. I think there's unique needs for all buyers, and in any kind of disruptive climate like today, I think you just need to make sure you're aware and responsive to what different buyers' needs are. The other stats we saw around this that I thought were interesting, 16% that hadn't changed at all. So when you put the two together, 46%, almost half, that either have escalated or going about the business the same way. So still a lot of business to be done there. 7% said that that what had changed was they were looking for more hands-on attention and engagement from solution providers. So I think over the past few years we've been doing this, we've seen some shifts where buyers have turned to peers more, buyers have looked for the review and rating sites, and we still see some of that. But I thought this year, I think buyers said they were looking to really lean on solution providers more as a resource. John, I want to get your perspective on this.
Yeah, Andrew, certainly uncertain times, and, these types of engagements going in both directions. I know, for demand-based and talking about ABM, we see ABM as the most efficient means for executing B2B marketing. So, as companies are maybe feeling contractions and thinking about how they need to go to market, that might accelerate some of their interest in looking at, an ABM provider or something like that, or getting the strategy off the ground. So, it's no surprise that you might actually see a bunch of marketers leaning into those types of investments. But, when we look at, things have either kind of stayed the same or they've accelerated, I think there's some other indicators there too, right? So if you were looking at an event management software, right, and then COVID hit, most likely you're not looking into that right now. You shut that process down because you can't hold live events, so what's the point? Likewise, you probably shifted and said, okay, well, if we can't do live events, what can we do? Do we have a webinar platform? Do we have a virtual event platform? We need to get one of those because, these interactions are so critical to our marketing success. We need to be able to keep it going. We can definitely see how different technologies may shift, even thinking about direct mail, right? If you're using a direct mail provider that has larger physical, dimensional mailers, early on in the COVID days, like you couldn't mail anything to anybody's office, right? Nobody was in their office. So, we're now seeing some of that transition where we're asking for preferred mailing addresses and telling people, hey, we can send you something at home, and we won't keep your personal address data in there. So there's a lot of different ways that these buying decisions and processes can shift just in this microcosm of COVID and pandemic over the last quarter and a half. But, I think the bottom stat here is really important because, especially if you don't own these technologies, we got to figure out as marketers how to get them stood up fast and get value out of them. And so where we don't have a lot of resources, where we can't necessarily take our time to do it, we have to pivot fast. We're going to be leaning on the solution providers. We're going to say, look, we want to get to value as quickly as possible. Help us through this. Don't leave us on our own to kind of figure it out. So I would expect to see more of those conversations, materialize as marketers and buyers are investing in different technologies or different purchase decisions, right? Just because it may not be technology, it might be something else. But they still need to get to the value quick and get the product in use in order to realize the value. So, so again, ever-changing kind of things are shifting back and forth a lot these days, but it doesn't surprise me to see these results.
No, I think those are great points, really relevant, particularly the event example and direct mail, I think relevant to our audience. I think the other thing I would just add is when you look out at industries, especially when COVID first hit, I mean, obviously the healthcare industry had much different needs than the retail industry, which had to shut most of its operations down and switch everything online. So I think it obviously does sort of scream of why ABM is becoming so much more relevant and important, is that you really can get down to the vertical level, obviously, but down to the account level and how their needs might shift at a time like this. So great examples. Thanks for that. So we look at, and we look at this every year, is just how have the following aspects of your purchase process changed over the past year? And I think it's interesting to look at this in the context of when we asked it was post-COVID. I realized it's a bit hard to read some of the descriptions on here, but the biggest one was the purchase decisions now progress based on changing business needs. I think it just aligns and sort of underscores what we talked about in the earlier slide of, we've talked about this now for a lot in the last couple of years, is that the B2B buying isn't this linear process that you can just kind of put on autopilot and put somebody in a nurture and they're automatically going to come out on the other end. I think buyers are saying, look, to John's point earlier, that I may have been looking at an event management platform 4 months ago, and that was my priority. Today, I need a virtual event management platform, and I need to move fast. And so I think just that seems to be the loudest thing that the buyers are saying is, help me with March for my changing priorities, be aware, be relevant and valuable. We spend more time researching purchases. Again, one of the things that we'll get into today is just that the length of B2B buying cycles is not showing any signs of shortening. That doesn't mean there's not going to be, instances where they're not accelerated, but I think the expectations and the way most operations are set up is to, be able to, probably front end a lot of the work that needs to happen and make that impression early on, surround buyers, be in front of them over a long haul, but just not assume that it's all going to sort of go slowly. The other one in the middle there, 76%, was we now expect more personalized attention from solution providers. And I think it leans back to, again, that last slide as well. I think, where there's a lot of resources, a lot of ways buyers can get educated, they're really going back to that word of partnership. So the vendor that they're choosing, they want to, work with them, avoid risk is a really key part for B2B. How quickly can I get it stood up, to John's point? How can I make sure it's going to work and make quick time to value? The other 73%, we used more sources to research and evaluate purchases. This has always been a high one, but again, almost 3/4 of the folks are really looking for a variety of sources when they were doing research. 71% said we now conduct a detailed ROI analysis. Not a surprise. I mean, it's always been a big factor, but I think it's a sort of underscored in this time of making sure there's a good, clear path to success. And then the last one is that we now have a formal buying committee in place to review purchases. This jumped up pretty significantly this year. It was in the 60s last year, and now 71%. So it's not only that we're seeing no signs of the length of the buying cycle shrink, but it's also the number of folks involved in influencing deals just continues to stretch. So, John, I threw a lot of data out there on that, but I'd love to get your perspective on what you found most interesting from this slide.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew, I think this is certainly backed up by what we were seeing in some of the previous slides about, leaning on vendors for support, trying to get as many resources as possible, right, going out and doing some digital research, trying to find out, what's the truth about this vendor, about this product, about, using it and getting the value, or about how quickly and how easily it is to set up and things like that. So that doesn't surprise me that it's getting more complex. And I think, again, in uncertain times, if we're going to invest in something, we need to make sure we're going to get the value out of that. So leading up to that, I think we're, as buyers, we're spending more time understanding what the real ROI is going to look like. And then I think there's some other factors too, right? As organizations become more mature, they might have compliance and regulations, things like that, in their in their organization. So there are more people who have to be involved in those processes and things like that. So I think, again, back to looking at what is it going to take to really get the value out of this? People start to think about what are the things beyond the marketing, the performance stat, what the vendor says the technology can do that really kind of play into that. And so I think there's a great way to look at that I borrowed a model from Gartner Hype Cycle to really showcase that.
Yeah. And
so when we think about that, it's called the Gartner Hype Cycle is where I borrowed this from. And if you look at it, it kind of starts with this real hype of, it's about creating a technology category, this great thing, it's the latest, greatest in sliced bread, it's going to do this. And everybody gets excited and people start purchasing it. And we get to that height, of excitement. And then people start to implement and the technology becomes more mature, and they call it this trough of disillusionment. And then there's a slope of enlightenment, and then there's reaching value. So kind of following those little nodes there on the continuum. When we think about technology adoption, I think it follows a similar process in our organizations. So we think about, well, we have this business problem we're trying to identify, we find a solution, we think it's going to solve it, it's awesome, we get so excited, we purchase it, and then what happens is most of the technologies fail when we try to implement them and get adoption with them. And so we never really get to that point of value. So I always talk about there's like 4 Ps to technology purchases. There's the product, there's the price, there's the people and the process. And I think the people and the process are the things that historically have been more overlooked, right? Like we'll figure that stuff out once we make the purchase. We'll get everybody involved. We'll figure out how to do it. I think more buyers are doing that before they make a purchase. They're getting sign off not only from, back office stakeholders, compliance, finance, et cetera, budgetary things, but they're also saying, hey, look, we're going to be partnering with sales and marketing to do this. So let's make sure everybody's on the same page and we all agree of how we're going to use this technology and get it implemented, and who's going to be responsible for doing what, and what phased approach we're going to do to rolling out all the different things that we want to use with it. And so I think, that's really where a lot of this stuff breaks down. And when I think about that cycle for adoption, that fits right into the previous stats we were looking at, because it just really shows that marketers are kind of slowing down to make sure they're making the right purchase, especially in these uncertain times. They can't just willy-nilly throw a budget around and buy something and then turn it into shelfware and let it go a year. They got to show the value, and the more that their numbers and performance are tied to things like bottom of the funnel metrics, to revenues and bookings and sales opportunities, they have to make sure they can tie these purchases to that too, to justify the value, or at least show some impact. So making sure that they're going to get to that point of value, that plateau of value, is really key in their decision-making process. And again, I think they're doing a lot of that research before they actually make a purchase.
I think that's been one of the positives too, John, of this slowdown, is that people have been sort of forced to reevaluate some things. So thinking more about value, thinking more about utilization. I've heard some really positive scenarios where in the past they'd be like, okay, well, let's also, if it's a marketing technology, let's think of how sales might use it or benefit from it. But then people even go on the next layer of, maybe our customer success team would get some value out of this kind of data. Should we talk about integrating this with them? So I just think some of the slowdown is going to have a positive impact on this long term.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the thing we talked about was, the complexity of B2B buying has not sort of waned at all. So when we looked at how many people were involved in the purchase process for this, you see on average it's around 6 to 7 if you look at it in aggregate. 54%, so it was between 4 and 9. This shifted up just slightly. I mean, we've seen this as about the norm, and I think it aligns with some of the other data that other folks that have researched B2B cycle. I think one of the thoughts we had when we analyzed this in the past was, well, there's more people that have to approve purchases now, that maybe, if you're buying a marketing technology as an example, that IT or the CFO has to approve it, procurement. So there was sort of just like, getting it okayed, but I think there's now more like true stakeholders. So maybe it's, put people up the ladder or down the ladder, but I think, get into that slowdown factor, hopefully it's going to have, more of an impact on success, because there's been more perspectives added in and more thought to how it's actually going to be utilized. But John, I'd be interested to get your perspective on what you see here.
Yeah, it's interesting. As long as we've been doing this, Andrew, we see the numbers kind of shift up and down a little bit over time, depending on the respondents. But, I remember way back when we started, there was a stat of about, 6.9. I don't know if you get how you have 0.9 buyers, but obviously an average. But, that's a pretty large, as you just said, kind of about 7 people are involved in a purchasing decision. And then, as we talk about, and we just, reference these different departments that there might be use cases for, and we're thinking about that in phase 2, phase 3, these are some of the additional influencers that we're bringing into the deal that maybe are not, traditionally involved in the sales cycle. So as marketers, if we can understand who could potentially be involved in those and make sure we're getting the message in front of the entire buying team, whether we know who they are or not, whether they're known in our CRM or marketing automation systems, or whether we can use kind of, anonymous account-based targeting and things like that to get in front of them. I think that's how we can make sure that we're getting the message in front of the entire buying team, which I would suggest probably there's, the bottom here of 10 plus people only being 11%, that might be actual people who are interacting with the vendor. I would bet that there are at least that many who are not, or the full buying team includes people who are not interacting with the vendor, and that more people actually probably have an account of 10 or plus, but they're just thinking about the immediate people involved in the conversation. So, it's not getting easier. It's not getting less complex. And I don't think we're going to see that in the foreseeable future. So we have to make sure that we're accounting for the full buying team and understand what that looks like at the companies we go after.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the most fundamentally positive changes that the ABM movement has brought, is that the marketers and companies that we talk to are less focused on leads and individuals, and I got somebody interested in realizing that there is a buying committee out there and the shift to, whether it be the demand unit waterfall as opposed to the traditional waterfall. We're hearing a lot more companies shift to say, we're not talking to one person, we're talking to multiple and looking at personas and how they have different messaging for them. So I think that's been a positive change and a necessary one as well. So the other talked earlier about length of buying, and I feel like at some point this is going to have to hit a wall where it can't get any longer. But again, this year when you asked how the length of your buying B2B purchase cycle has changed on average compared to a year ago, 68% said it increased. Only 26% said it stayed the same, and a small percentage said that it decreased. I think that we talked a lot about it already. There's been a bit of a slowdown, maybe a reevaluation of just buying solutions for the sake of having new stuff. But I also think that again, businesses in general, the B2B sector, are thinking more about, business impact and thinking long-term about things like John talked about of utilization and time to value. And I don't think that's going to go away. Different, use cases, different instances where, we talk a lot historically that B2B is 6 to 12 months in a lot of sectors. But there's also instances where, again, John pointed out in the beginning that virtual event solutions are really hot in B2B. There's a lot of people that probably want to get that done and in place and picked and implemented as quickly as possible in the current climate. So I think it varies, but I think in general, businesses should be set up to address the long-term complexity that's in place and the multiple buyers and buying committee, but be agile enough that they can move quickly when clients call for it. So, John, anything different you're seeing around sort of length and cycle and how companies are addressing it?
Yeah, and so we've seen personally demand-based. We've actually seen some shifts in our average sales cycle length or velocity of that. In a positive direction, kind of shortening, and that might be a factor of better education, more maturity within the ABM market and things like that. But if we think about B2B buying holistically, I would expect, you say there's got to be a ceiling at some point. Things keep increasing, but there might even be kind of a turnover, a change of the guard, if you will, that the stayed the same actually shows some of the companies that are a little bit more mature. Maybe they have more processes they have to go through, more hoops to jump through, and that's not going to change. And so, those who are maybe haven't been beholden to those historically are now starting to experience that, right? And so it is slowing down for them. They're thinking, wow, I do need to do this research up front. I do need to gauge all these stakeholders, but there's a lot of other things I'm learning about, hoops I have to jump through to make sure that we're doing the right things for our business. So if you take into example, recent regulations over the past couple of years like GDPR or CCPA, or even technologies becoming compliant for privacy and security reasons, those things can really slow down a purchase decision. I think there was a report that came out towards the end of last year that talked about, in particular in marketing technology, but looking at some of those data points, and GDPR is 3 years old now. And said about 75% of all the technologies were compliant with GDPR. It's like, okay, that's great. Most of them are there. Probably the ones that aren't either really new or it doesn't really apply to them. They don't have kind of like PII, personal information. But interestingly, when we look at like a standard operational control certification like a SOC 2, only 13% of the companies included in that result were compliant with that. So, if you're trying to sell or you're trying to buy from a large organization and you need to maintain those compliancies for your organization, there are a lot of hoops you have to jump through to get that done. So, you might be doing the ROI analysis, the stakeholder analysis, the implementation analysis. Then you have to go through and get all this stuff approved by the back office, by the compliance teams and things like that. And so that's, it's like getting contracts reviewed. They have to go through, word by word, report by report, review all this stuff to approve it to make sure, it's not going to put, their business at risk for using this vendor. So that can really slow things down. In a demand base, we're a compliant organization as well. So I'll show you a couple or the flow that we have to go through when we're buying technologies, just to kind of show that as an example. So here's our flow. When I'm looking at technologies for our marketing organization and trying to figure out, what they're going to do and how we're going to be able to use them. I'm doing all that ROI, all that kind of stuff up front to create kind of a short list of vendors to figure out, what we should be doing, which we should be looking at, and who should be involved in doing that. So I have to do all of that before I even get into this. But then kind of starting top left, I've got a vendor or two I'm looking at. I have to go through some decision trees, right? So, do I need, are they compliant, and what types of reports do they have, and those kind of risk mitigations to our business? Is it going to require any IT implementation or impact any IT systems? These days, there's almost always something with like SSO they have to be able to do. When I'm thinking about other systems like our CRM or other tools, are there going to be requirements of that team to help with implementation, and they need to sign off on the process? So there's a lot of these kind of back office technical teams I need to go through to get sign off, even though we're going to be doing the majority of the implementation ourselves and stand up and training and onboarding. Once I get through that, then I have the opportunity to look at a trial or proof of concept of that to really, get my hands on the tool and see what it looks like and get a feel for it. And if that trial goes well, then we can get into, final negotiations of contracts and all these other things. So, if you just think about all these little nodes, all these little hoops I have to jump through to get a technology purchase in order to mitigate risk for our business, that can slow things down. I can be talking to the vendor, I can know the right solution, I can have it all figured out and understand. Maybe it's something I've used before in a previous company, but I still have to go through this process. So it's hard to control the timelines of these people. And get them to just work fast as you're the top priority, because they're managing these situations across the entire business. For the IT team, for our HR team, for our sales team, when they're buying technologies or other services, they're going through this process as well. So I'm one of many going through the process from their perspective. So you can imagine how that would kind of slow things down a little. So I think as more organizations become mature, as more of these security and compliance requirements hit different markets, we're just going to see this continue to slow down a little, as we need to stop and make sure we're evaluating our purchases, both from an effectiveness and ROI perspective, but also a risk mitigation perspective.
So I thought that was really interesting, John, in terms of the, looking at your scenario there, and I think it gives some color to it. So we're going to look at in this next slide here what some of the first steps people took. I wanted to first ask you, though, the level 1, level 2, any color you can add to that about sort of where buying committee, members happen, like when do you typically get your, approvals or your bosses buy-in? Any other color you'd add to that?
Yeah, so a lot of that actually happens before I even get to that decision matrix. So my, across the other teams and use cases or budgetary approval or things like that have happened before we even get to that. That's really where it comes down to. We need to do our kind of security compliance and kind of trial evaluation and contract negotiation stuff. So at that point, I've shortlisted a vendor or two at most. And are kind of finalizing the vendor choice that I want to go through. But at that point, having them go through the compliance. I don't want to throw 10 vendors through compliance just because I'm not, I'm thinking about all of them, because that's not a great use of the legal and compliance team's time. So I'm getting all my, kind of concept, all my use cases, all my user buy-in, all that stuff before I even get to that matrix.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point to sort of the next phase of this. I still feel like one of the missed opportunities is that when B2B organizations think about things in that linear fashion of, okay, well, we'll sort of do a drip campaign and sales will get involved later. I still feel like so much of the short list is happening really fast and before, a lot of brands know it. So I think, this, when we go to the next data point here, when we looked at, when you started your journey, and you gave the example of, sort of looks like in your organization, but what were the first things that really formed your, what should be on the short list? What were you looking for? What did you want? And a lot of that starts still with web search. That's the top one, which isn't a huge surprise. A lot of starting directly on vendor websites is sort of the next source. But then we see, review sites jumped up again. So I think that's having a bigger impact. Peer experiences actually dropped a little bit this year, but that's still what we see as a growing influence and peer colleague feedback as well. But I think there's just, the awareness, the approach of buyers there's still a lot of anonymous research that goes on, and that those are really sort of impressionable times there, because as you said, you're getting a short list, you're getting buy-in from key members. all the way before you go through a lot of those key stages. So if you miss being on that short list, it's going to be hard to sort of work your way back into consideration. So just wanted to get your perspective on sort of these early stage impressions and what you're seeing both from sort of a buyer perspective as well as a marketer.
Yeah, I think we have seen the peers and colleagues kind of drop down a couple notches this year, and given that we're talking about kind of post-COVID experiences, that doesn't surprise me, right? It's a lot harder to go to a networking event or to connect with people who have used or are evaluating those solutions and kind of get their input. But I think as we see here, going out, searching the web, hitting vendor websites, things like that, review sites, that really leads me to the concept of intent, right? And thinking about, as you said, they're going to show some initial interest and intent in research and different solutions and different topics related to those. And that's where the marketer, a digital marketer, has the opportunity to kind of capitalize on that buyer behavior and make sure they're not left behind in that short list, because they're going to go out and say, okay, I have this problem. How do I solve it? Okay, that's real early on intent. Now that I understand maybe what some of the options are, let me dig into those and really find out, figure out what the nuances are between those so I can create that short list. And that's probably going to happen fairly quickly in the process. And then from there, they're going to be spending a lot of time learning about, the purchase, be it a technology or a service or something like that, how it's going to work, who's going to interact with them, and how that's all going to, come to fruition if they make a purchase. And I think that's where they're spending a lot of that time. And I would say that's where you start to see a lot of the review site stuff come up as well, because they're going in, and that might even be considerable with the peers and colleagues, but looking at, what are users saying about this product? If they're at that point where they're looking at review sites, they probably already have a short list. So, if that type of intent is showing up for you and you're not already kind of selling to that account, that's a red flag, or that's an emergency alarm that says, hey, we need to be in this deal. Let's get after that account. So, I think in the COVID world, we're all going to be leaning more on digital resources to do that. And hopefully once we get out of that, maybe some of those, more face-to-face things will pop up. But, I think it really just shows that, these digital buying signals are available to us as marketers. And those of us that capitalize those are probably going to have come out of this better than those who have not. So I think it's really important to think about those signals and the intent and how you can harness those.
Yeah, it's a great point about intent, because again, we're seeing a ton of interest around intent. I think some people that are newer to it are just looking at it as a sales tool, where okay, we want to make sure we know buyers that are in market, or however they sort of overly simplify it. I think the other way of looking at it is gathering as much intelligence as you can about who's in market, and sort of making that favorable impression early on is a great point. So obviously, how do you make that favorable impression? There's a lot more companies that are trying to do targeted advertising, sort of being in front of, surrounding the buyer at key stages. When we asked buyers directly, did you notice ads from the solution provider you chose that they presented to you during your research process? 48% said yes, and that the ads that they noticed positively impacted their decision. 23% said yes, they didn't feel like it had changed their perception of the solution. Maybe it just sort of validated it. But between that, 70+% are definitely saying that they're noticing. And that doesn't count for those maybe that didn't remember they saw it. It was sort of subliminal. But I think we're just seeing this more and more that it's easier from a technology standpoint to serve up ads and do targeting, and we all know that as marketers. But I think the good news is, and I think the reality that we all need to factor in is, those ads are being noticed, so they should be relevant. They should be as targeted as possible, and done the right way, they're going to have a positive impact on their buying decision. John, this is something you live and breathe. Is this something you see clients getting better at and realizing and applying more?
Absolutely, Andrew. It's it's interesting when you think about where an ad really has its most impact across the journey of a prospect into customer, and what that ad can really do. We've experimented a lot of different ways at Demandbase on how to use ads, top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom, customer, et cetera. And what we've been seeing most recently is that if we have to prove value with our digital media spend and we really want to move the needle the most, it's really good at generating awareness, right? We can take companies that are not necessarily aware of our brand, not engaging with us, advertise to them, and show we're really driving up engagement with those. But, for those organizations that already know who we are, we're not going to see as much uplift or lift in engagement, right? It's probably already trending, it's already there. So we're not necessarily going to see it move the needle as much. And, when you think about it impacting the, a sale, one of the challenges with ads is that, once a company is already aware and engaged with you, the ad isn't going to do that much more incrementally than what it did to get them aware and engaged in the first place. Probably because your baselines are going to be higher already, so your measured impact isn't going to be as great. Also because an ad, an ad copy is fairly short, right? You don't get to talk about deep solution impact or things like that. Maybe if you're doing some kind of like funnel, competitive displacement type things, if you're seeing competitive intent, that might be a little valuable to helping with the sale. But, we've actually been seeing, especially in the COVID times, that a lot of our customers have been shifting their budgets into digital display. So, large organizations who had big, events and field marketing departments, things like that, who can no longer execute any of those types of events, are saying, well, what can we do? And so they say, well, we can put our money into digital investments, into media, and let's try out and test some of these different, funnel-based approaches or things like that. So, or maybe we only had a certain volume of budget where we could go after a certain volume of accounts. Now we can go after a greater set of accounts in our target account list. So we're seeing marketers shift their budgets pretty dramatically into digital display, because that's one of the channels that they have at their disposal, and in particular with demand-based and account-based advertising, they know that every media dollar they put through that is going directly to the accounts they care about. So there's zero waste there, and they know they're not wasting it on other kind of display networks that are less targeted and maybe don't show the value. So yeah, I would expect to see that trend continue as long as the pandemic's here, until we have some other resources at our disposal.
Okay, great. So we talked about how important the website is in the purchase and sort of that first stop for a lot of people on the journey. We asked buyers how important were the following aspects when you visited the website of the potential solution providers for the purchase. So we talk a lot about this, about relevance and personalization, but when you look at the white bars, the folks, what they rated as very important, relevant content that speaks directly to our company. I think it was sort of the top wish for buyers. The second one in the middle there on the right was vendor-focused content that speaks, product data, sheets, things that we expect from a website. 57% said the website spoke directly to our industry needs. So I think if you can't feel like you're able to customize to the company specifically, you at least have a very something that's easy to navigate to, that speaks that their business, or at least their category. On the bottom left, there are vendor-focused case studies, obviously very important. Easy access to content without long forms is something that John, maybe you can add a little bit on. And then thought leadership content white papers still ranks up there. So I think there's relevance and speaking to their specific business just continues to be a priority, and something we see kind of increasing every year. John, anything you'd add here?
Yeah, I mean, just to echo that, personalization is key, right? We talked about people wanting to, figure out that shortlist and then really dive into the functionality and things like that. In order for them to get to that shortlist, they got to see the information they need to see. They can't spend their time, wading through a resource center or, start digging through websites trying to find the content they need. It's got to be served up to them. And it has to be easy for them to access, as you just noted. Like, they can't have a super long form for every asset that they have to go through in order to get the content. They have to be able to see what they need and be able to make decisions. And so, the companies that can, capitalize on making it easier for their prospects and customers to get the content on their website are going to be the ones that are more successful at engaging them and working with them. So what I wanted to show is a couple examples of some things we've been doing on the demand-based website around this. One around, how we've tested some form links and things like that. As well as some content recommendations on our site to show how they've improved that engagement. So it's always been the mantra in digital marketing that, the shorter the form, the better the conversion. And, again, back when we started, Andrew, there was a metric that was around I think it was an 8% conversion lift for every field you removed. But there's been some research recently that actually shows that doesn't, hold all the way true to, one field, especially in B2B. So it's expected that they're going to, collect some information if you're looking for a high value asset. So, for example, we did some testing on our forms links here to kind of find out, if we were to increase or, make the form smaller and easier to consume, would that actually increase conversion? So the one you see on the left is our traditional form. You can kind of see the fold of the browser right there in the middle. And then on the right is a test where we moved two of the fields right next to each other to showcase, a shorter form. Now, note we have a product that appends other corporate data behind the scenes for that. So things like, industries, company sizes, addresses, all those different types of things. And those are the types of fields I think if you can remove from your forms, it's going to help improve conversions. But when you get down to hey, let's take out last name or just make it email or things like that, is that really going to make the difference? So this was a test to say, hey, look, if we can get, shorter fields above the form and things like that, is that really going to help improve our conversion rates? So how did that perform? Ironically, we actually saw that the original form, which appeared to be a little bit longer, actually had better conversion rates than when we shortened it up and brought those two forms next to each other. So, this exemplifies the importance of testing and understanding the behavior of your buyers on your website, because while it seems intuitive, hey, let's just knock that down to an email, or let's bring some of those forms a little bit shorter fields and up top to make it easier for people to start filling them out, that actually doesn't improve the conversion on the website when someone gets to a gated asset. But as we talked about, we also need to think about how can we quickly and easily get this content in front of our prospects and customers. So not everything should be behind a gate. And oftentimes what we look at is maybe there are a couple of really high value, important bottom of funnel assets that we want to put behind a gate, but there's some top of funnel assets as well that we want people to consume freely. So we ungate those. So that's great. And if we can capitalize on those buying signals to our sales team, we can help them kind of understand when accounts are beginning to engage with us and investigate. But we also want to make sure we do get them to raise their hand at some point. So here's another test I'm going to show you some results for. So you can see in the screenshot, kind of at the top part of it is an ungated asset. So this would be an example of something around a digital advertising ebook that helps people understand our marketers understand the difference between account-based advertising and more traditional digital display and some of the nuances. And then below, you can see there are about 6 different assets that are listed there that are recommendations. So that's actually powering off a product from Demandbase called Site Optimization. Uses AI, looks at the visitors, cookies, looks at the account that's visiting, and then recommends content that we believe is relevant to them based upon a multitude of different factors. So somebody gets to an ungated website, but we want to see if they're willing to raise their hand. And so we promote this additional content to them that's AI driven. And what we've seen is that, when they're engaging with these recommendations, they're spending a lot more time on site, close to 400% greater time on site. So that's deep engagement. Those are signals for sales, and that's digital intelligence on what's going on. We also see they're looking at more pages per session, obviously because they're engaging with more content, and then they're 230% more likely to convert and raise their hand when they're on the site, when they start to engage with additional assets. So, we've heard a lot about binging of content these days, merchandising of content. When we can use the technology at our fingertips to do that, we can actually show that we can get them more deeply engaged, and we can get them to convert at a much higher rate when we're putting the right types of content in front of them. And so, we don't have to curate the stuff all ourselves. We can actually rely on technologies to do that for us.
Awesome. So we've covered a lot of the really important fundamentals of the study. I'm going to plan to walk through the rest of this a little bit quicker on the back end here. When we looked at, one of the things I think are just kind of these points echo for me that a lot of the key things really happen at the front end, and that the marketing is really impacting, again, making that short list and sort of first impression that's going to, I think, have a big impact. So, things that happened, when you look at the white bar there, it's what happened in under a month, and then the second is 1 to 6 months, and then 6 to 12 months. But, a lot of the things that we would think might happen later in a buying journey, a lot of those really happening pretty early on, sometimes in the first month. So, engage with a sales representative. More than a third of the folks we surveyed said they did that within the first month. So again, it's not that they're doing all this digital journey anonymously and then waiting to engage a salesperson. A lot of them are not shying away from engaging, getting all the information that they can, and using that as a resource. The development of an informal list of potential providers, the example John shared, that happened really early on, and here it's happening for the majority of it within the first 6 months, a lot within the first month. Pricing, a lot of things that you'd expect there. So, John, I just want to get your impression, if you could expand a little bit quickly on this, of key steps that people are taking along the journey. Are you seeing them getting a bit accelerated, and any strategies you'd recommend to maybe impact that?
Yeah, so I think harnessing some of those intent signals to understand when that's happening, because we are seeing a lot more buyers these days turn to the vendors and rely on them to kind of usher them through the process. So, but we also want to make sure that we're looking for other signals, right? So maybe there's competitive intent signals, so we know who else is in our deal besides us. Maybe there's intent around different types of products you offer, so you can think about cross-sell, upsell that maybe the prospect isn't bringing to the table for you, and you can offer up. So as they're going through this and doing the research and at different stages, I think those are the types of signals that can come in and really help you understand, what are the right times to engage in these different conversations.
Yeah, it's a great point, especially the competitive part and the cross-sell, upsell. The other thing we talked about, the 5 most important variables we asked about, when evaluating a list of solution providers. Some of these, not a surprise, pricing is always at the top of the list, but this year features and functionality was the number one. And I think when I talked about this a little bit earlier, it seems like that probably aligns with the value equation, that they want to make sure they're really clear on what this can do, how easy it's going to be to use. Some of the other things that made the list, again, reviews were important. Deployment time of use, again, sort of back to that time to value, and again, just making sure that it's solved a pain point, which is kind of surprising that it's down low, but I think maybe people are kind of taking that for granted. So any quick things you'd add here, John?
No, I concur. I think, the solving the pain point is a factor that happens early on. They've defined the pain point, they're looking to solve it, and they're spending a lot of their time looking at the features and functionalities of how they're how that solution solves it for them, and then maybe making decisions based upon pricing and reviews and things like that to try to get a good deal. So I think it aligns with some of the other data on timelines and processes we've seen before.
Yep, good, thanks. So top 5 reasons for choosing a vendor when you're past that consideration stage and you're maybe deciding between 1, 2, 3 vendors. Some of the things there, the top answer was to demonstrate a strong knowledge of their solution area and the business landscape. So again, some of the things that they kind of take for granted, now it's like, how well do you know your product and how it's going to work for me? And I think that some people might take that for granted, but I think it's really important. Some of the sort of write-in answers we get really validated this, that that people talk about, that they spent the time to learn their business, that they showed up, and knew a lot about the category. Strong knowledge of our company and needs was almost 2/3 of companies said that. So the buyer said that was really important. Provided content that made it easier to build, so content marketing is still really influential. Provided high value quality content was more than half of the folks. And timeliness of a vendor's response, I think, again, when we talk about how you're making that initial impression, more than half rated the timeliness as important. And again, that's something that came through in some of the write-ins that we saw as well. So just wanted to get any quick color or additional thoughts you might have on some of these stats, John.
Yeah, Andrew, thanks. Yeah, we're definitely, you can see personalization kind of across all these and getting the right content. And that's going to be even more important in this kind of COVID world where people are working from home. They are doing a lot more digital research, and that's those are the tools that are available for them. But, I don't think that it should stop just there, right? I think, we got to get the right content to them. at the right time, and that's going to set us apart from our competitors. But again, that being in the digital world, there's also other approaches to engaging the buyer's team that has to happen, and marketing isn't just a solo act in doing that. It takes sales and marketing alignment, as you hear about, and takes the teams working in cohesion. You were talking about that earlier in the session about, kind of working in tandem across the entire cycle. So I think as these complex buying cycles continue, we're going to see more and more of this kind of hand-holding between sales and marketing and working in conjunction.
Yeah, I think orchestration and coordination, those are going to be key words. The other thing said was, did you feel the multiple members of your buying team were engaged? It's a new question we asked, if they were engaged and educated by the sales rep. And good news, almost 2/3 said that they did feel like the sales rep met all of the individual buying team needs. Some said somewhat, so I think in general it's really positive. We talk a lot about buying committees, so we wanted to see if this ABM influence is coming through to the buyer and felt like it's really having a good impact. So, John, I'm curious if this would be what you'd expect, and any other thoughts you'd have on that.
Yeah, and I think our last slide, thinking about how these the sales counterparts to marketing are engaging with the buying team at large. Just working with the final decision maker isn't going to get the deal done. Right, we need to make sure we have buy-in from everybody who's on the decision-making team and who's being influenced in making that deal. So no surprise that the companies that are doing best are kind of having that type of behavior, and that's something we practice and preach at Demandbase as well, and I'll show you an example of that. So as we said, I think personalization doesn't end just with the digital marketing, right? It's got to go beyond into the sales interactions. And so intent can be a great way to prioritize digital marketing. It can also be passed off to sales so they can do personalized outreach. They also are going to go and gather intelligence from other solutions and other systems as well. So here's kind of a rough example of one of our inside salespeople and how they took a LinkedIn post, put it into an outreach email, and went after some of the members of the buying team who might be a little bit more likely to engage with him, and then got some responses back. So highlighting, the head of the department and what they're saying about the topic, and then trying to engage with, the director to kind of find out what they're doing tactically on the day-to-day to see how they might be able to help. So I think the sales reps who can use that level of personalization, they're going to cut through the noise, and they're going to be able to make connections and build rapport with, with the buying team at their accounts. Likewise, we don't stop with just thinking about personalization. We actually have developed personas of our buying teams. And now, we're not necessarily building tons of content across all these different personas. We do have some. But what we're also doing is enabling our sales team to understand those personas. What are the things they're challenged with? How are they involved in deals? What are their goals? How are they being measured? How do they look at their day-to-day job? So our salespeople have a resource to say, if I'm talking to this type of persona in the buying committee, I know what's relevant to them, and I can communicate in their own tongue. So it really helps them engage them and talk about how our solutions can go in there and help them individually in their day-to-day, but also the organization as a whole. So I think, again, we have to make sure that personalization is being translated into our quote face-to-face, or maybe, Zoom-to-Zoom communications, email communications that we're seeing with our sales reps. So, a mixture of intent and then understanding the needs and priorities of those buyers is really key to help them cut through the noise and build those relationships.
Awesome. All right, so the final thing I just wanted to share with folks, the B2B Buyer Survey with about 230 respondents, and there's information that we can share on what the sample breakdown looked like. Our biggest sector, obviously, is high tech. That's pretty reflective of our readership. But we did get a lot from manufacturing this year. We got a lot in professional services, financial services. One of the things that's come out of doing the survey for a couple of years, we've had a couple of companies that come to us and said, we're really interested in what this looks like for our particular vertical that we operate in, so we do some crosstabs for them. We've also worked on some people with some custom versions of such survey that they can bring to their particular vertical. Any trends quickly, John, that you've seen that are sort of unique to verticals?
Certainly technology is pretty high up on there, and we have a lot of technology companies that work with us, but definitely seeing, as you said earlier, a lot of shifts in healthcare, and, medical, drug providers and things like that, or manufacturers who are trying to reach the hospitals in this crazy time. So, likewise, we've seen kind of financial services trail off a little bit as they're kind of pulling back. They're usually kind of more of a laggard industry. So I think as they were trying to kind of lean in, this happened, and they're pulling back a little bit. But, overall, we're still seeing across our industries and verticals that we go after, it's fairly consistent. So that's obviously a positive sign for us.
Awesome. So we covered a lot of data. We did some good questions that came in. Unfortunately, we're going to have to do kind of a lightning round on that, John. So I want to get a couple of them, get your perspective on. A few different versions of this question, but the question from Mike was just any other insights, examples we'd share of how companies are overcoming the lack of face-to-face that their sales teams are getting. We talked a little bit about virtual events in the beginning, but anything else you've seen of how you at Demandbase or others have sort of overcome the lack of physical contact?
Yeah, so, we talked about, little kind of micro events or things like that have gone away. We've been doing some like customer roundtables where it's just a small set of, 8 to 10 different customers and kind of having roundtable discussions. Zoom happy hours. We have some really cool events that are coming up this quarter where they're kind of Zoom-based wine tastings and things like that. So, I think we can find that if we kind of apply what we did in an event schedule to a virtual, we can still accomplish some of the same goals. A lot of, virtual events like what Demand Gen Report does so well in terms of, the campaign optimization series, the buyer series, the strategy and planning series towards the end of the year that, we always participate in. I think we're seeing more of those pop up from different vendors and things like that versus, kind of the industry experts like you guys. So those are the ones that seem to be working. Digital e-gifting has been working pretty well, right? And then, as I mentioned, we're even starting to get some of the dimensional mailers back up where people are willing to have stuff sent to their homes. So there's definitely some ways to kind of cut through and do that. It's probably going to take a little bit more effort and a little bit more trust development between the brands and the salespeople to have those be kind of as impactful as they were when it was face-to-face. But it seems like we're trending in that direction.
Awesome. We have a couple of questions about content. Rachel asked if we've seen any, the study talked about how important content is, if there's any sort of new trends or approaches that you've seen in terms of content marketing or offerings.
I think the latest trends I've seen are around kind of like measuring engagement and how you can harness that type of data. So I think to our personalization conversation, right, if we can, allow our prospects and customers to consume as much content as they want unabated, and we can still measure that, that's really kind of the secret sauce. So, we've seen on our sales side, we talk about intent is the new lead. So you don't necessarily need a hand raise. If you can kind of, harness those signals, you can jump in and get ahead of those deals. So not necessarily a whole lot of new content. I think it's more about how we provide access to and then measure performance and harness the insights that is really what's the secret sauce these days.
Yeah, that's a great point, because when we talk about value, I think engagement's a really important metric around that. Final question from Rob was, he said it sounds like he's with an SMB type solution, sells to multiple industries. He's asking if he can apply sort of the ABM practices across and some of the customization that we talked about across a lot of industries.
Certainly you can, right? So, some of the approaches to doing that, you have to think about how you're going to do that at scale. So if you have a lot of different industries, thinking about the average deal sizes that you're getting from those and, what type of investments you should be putting in there. But when we really kind of think about ABM at its core, it's about a set of businesses that share a similar set of characteristics that you can, put into a segment. It's an account-based segment is another way to kind of think about it. So you can absolutely do that. It's been done for years without technology. Technology just makes it easier to do it and to scale it with less effort and less cost. So you could definitely do that, without too much, insight into the specific industries and those things. I would be looking at within those industries what type of characteristics are similar within those accounts that are relevant to the business, and then trying to think about messaging that will appeal to those and how you would get that out there. So, you might if you have an ABM solution that you can personalize your website, you might change up the offers in your resource center based upon the industry that's showing up, so they're only seeing the industry-related content. And that's a good way to, again, help them get right to the information they need to understand how they might be able to work with you.
Awesome. All right, we're right at the top of the hour, so we packed a lot in. Gentlemen, thank you, my friend. Again, outstanding insights as always.
Thanks, Andrew. It's always been great to work with you guys and to see these reports, so keep it up.
All right. Quick reminder, next session's at 2 p.m., and it's going to be on Audience First, Optimizing the Buyer's Journey. So tune in, and hopefully we'll see you on the rest of the sessions throughout the series. Have a great rest of your day.